Chosen one, something is already moving, even if your eyes cannot explain it yet. What feels unsettled around you is not unfolding the way it appears on the surface. There is an urgency in heaven, not the kind that announces disaster, but the kind that comes when something long prepared begins moving into place with remarkable precision. It carries your name, your story, and the season you are standing in, and that movement has reached a point where it can no longer remain hidden. Before your mind tried to understand it, your spirit had already begun to recognize it. You felt it the first time your old routines stopped feeling like home, when conversations that once energized you suddenly felt empty, or when you picked up your phone searching for something that could explain what was happening inside you, only to put it back down with even more questions than before. Some mornings you woke with a quiet weight in your chest that refused to leave, a feeling too real to ignore and too difficult to describe. You called it anxiety, you called it restlessness. Maybe you even wondered if everything was beginning to fall apart. But perhaps what frightened you was never the ending you imagined. Perhaps it was the first sign that your life had begun making room for something you could not yet see. Chosen one, stay with me for a moment, because this is where many people misunderstand the season they are living in. I have watched people stand at the edge of the greatest turning point of their lives and mistake it for the darkest chapter they had ever known. The pressure they felt convinced them something was breaking, when in reality something was quietly coming together beneath the surface. The direction you give meaning to today will shape how you walk through the days ahead. This message has not arrived to increase your fear. It has found you because your perspective matters now more than ever. What feels chaotic from where you stand may actually be the careful work of God rearranging what human effort could never rearrange, gently closing doors that have already served their purpose while preparing space for the ones meant for your next season. What your eyes register as confusion, your spirit has been trying to recognize as careful design. There is a reason these words reached you today instead of months ago. Something inside you paused before you even realized why, almost as though another part of you whispered, "Don't scroll past this." That quiet recognition deserves your attention because sometimes your spirit notices what your thoughts have not caught up to yet. If you misunderstand this season, you may spend your energy repairing what is actually being renewed or resisting the very movement that has come to carry you forward. From where you stand, this kind of divine movement rarely looks impressive. It feels like pressure with no obvious explanation. It feels like opportunities disappearing without warning, while others refuse to leave your life no matter how many times you try to move on. It feels like relationships ending without a satisfying answer, prayers meeting long stretches of silence, and provision arriving so late that you wonder whether you were forgotten in the first place. And maybe that has been the deepest ache of all. Not the hardship itself, but the quiet conclusion. You slowly began believing that heaven had become silent, because heaven had stepped away from you. Perhaps that is the belief being healed. When a river changes its course, everything along its banks must adjust. Trees that stood for years find themselves beside unfamiliar water. Stones that never expected to move suddenly feel the current pulling around them. From the perspective of a single stone, everything looks like destruction. From above, it is simply the river finding the path it was always created to follow. Chosen one, you are not the stone. You are the river. What feels like disruption is the sound of your life flowing toward the place it was always meant to reach. The season that suddenly feels too small is not rejecting you. It has simply become too narrow for who you are becoming. If something inside you quietly recognized itself in these words, I want you to do something with that recognition. Type, "The alarm is ringing," in the comments below, not because anyone asked you to, but because there is something powerful about giving a name to what your heart has been carrying in silence. Sometimes the moment you acknowledge what has been stirring within you, everything begins to feel a little clearer. Now let me show you why this season carries so much tension. Because the confusion is not random, and neither is the timing. Most messages stop at encouragement, but there is something deeper that deserves to be understood. The kind of inner urgency you have been carrying is deeply personal. It is the kind that wakes you before your alarm, for reasons you cannot explain. It is the feeling that your old life still looks the same from the outside, yet somewhere inside you already know you cannot return to the person you were. Not everyone experiences that kind of pressure. Some people continue through life without ever sensing it. Others carry it quietly for months, even years, unable to explain why everything familiar suddenly feels too small. If that has been your experience, it does not automatically mean something is wrong. Sometimes it means you have drawn close enough to your next season that the atmosphere itself begins to change. Think about an airplane as it begins its descent. The pressure inside the cabin shifts. Your ears adjust. The ride can feel unfamiliar even when everything is unfolding exactly as it should. The discomfort is part of the arrival. Chosen one, perhaps what you have been calling danger has actually been preparation. Perhaps what felt like losing control has been the unmistakable sign that you are approaching somewhere your soul has been moving toward for much longer than you realize. That is why I want to give this season a name. I call it the pressure before the passage. It is more than a poetic phrase. It is a pattern that appears again and again in the lives of people who carry a deep calling. Before every meaningful transition, life often feels smaller before it becomes larger. Before clarity arrives, uncertainty seems to grow louder. Before the next door opens, the current room begins to feel like it can no longer contain who you are becoming. The moment you recognize that pattern, everything begins to change. You stop spending all your strength trying to survive the pressure, and you begin asking a different question. What if this pressure is not asking you to endure it? What if it is inviting you to receive what it has been preparing you for? If you'd like, I can continue with the next section in the same style and maintain seamless continuity. Here is what I have noticed over and over again. Chosen one. Every meaningful transition carries a season that almost everyone misunderstands while they are living through it. Before life expands, it often feels as though everything around you is shrinking. Before provision begins to overflow, there are moments when every resource seems stretched thin. Before you finally discover the strength you are meant to carry, you often become painfully aware of everything you believe you lack. Relationships grow quieter before the right people find their way into your life. Dreams that once felt crystal clear suddenly seem wrapped in fog, as if you have forgotten the very thing you once knew with certainty. It is unsettling because nothing outside of you seems to make sense anymore. Yet somewhere deep inside you cannot shake the feeling that something important is changing. This is not random. It is a pattern that existed long before you arrived here, and it has repeated itself in the lives of those who were being prepared for something greater than they could yet understand. Maybe you have felt it yourself. Your heart keeps telling you that something has to change, but every time you try to define exactly what it is, the answer slips through your fingers. You pray with sincerity, and although you know your words are leaving your lips, you wonder why the silence seems louder than the response. You wake up, go to work, smile through conversations, keep showing up for your responsibilities, yet underneath it all lives a quiet awareness that the life you are living no longer matches the person you know you are becoming. Perhaps the hardest part has been the distance between those two realities, not the life you have, the life you can already feel. That gap has probably never seemed wider than it does right now. When people reach this place, they often begin telling themselves painful stories. They convince themselves they missed their moment. They wonder whether God quietly moved on while they were still waiting. Proud or misunderstood the calling altogether. Slowly, almost without noticing, they begin settling into a smaller version of themselves, because believing in the larger one starts to feel too expensive. But chosen one, what if the door you believe has disappeared has never actually closed? What if you only stopped walking because the hallway became dark before it became clear? That changes everything. The pressure you are carrying is not evidence that growth has stopped. It is often the very condition that makes growth possible. Before new life enters the world, everything narrows. The walls press inward. The intensity increases. From the outside, it can appear as though everything is reaching its breaking point. Yet inside that pressure, life is completing something it could never complete in comfort. Perhaps your season has been more like that than you realized. The crisis has never been the whole story. It has been part of the process. What you have called an emergency may simply be the final stretch of a preparation that has been unfolding for much longer than you knew. The faith you carry today did not grow because life was easy. It was shaped in prayers that seemed unanswered, in mornings when you kept showing up without visible proof, and in nights when all you had left was the quiet decision to believe one more day. You are not carrying less because of what you have endured. You are carrying differently, more deeply, more steadily, more honestly. The years behind you were never empty years. They were years that pressed hidden strength into places comfort never could have reached. They formed patience where there was once urgency, wisdom where there was once impulse, and compassion that could only be born through experience. Chosen one, you are not behind. You are becoming ready. Hold on to that truth, because it opens the door to something even deeper. Think about Joseph. He was only 17 when a dream settled into his heart. A dream so much larger than his circumstances that there was no room around him capable of holding it. He knew it mattered long before he understood why. Then, almost immediately, everything began moving in the opposite direction of what that dream seemed to promise. He was betrayed by the people who should have protected him. He was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and later imprisoned because of a lie he never deserved. If anyone had measured his life by appearances alone, they would have called his story a failure long before it reached its purpose. But Joseph could not see what heaven already knew. The pit was never standing in the way of the dream. The pit was carrying him toward it. Every betrayal stripped away something that could not travel into his future. Every delay formed a kind of strength that authority would one day require. Every lonely year shaped a man who could eventually carry influence without being destroyed by it. When Pharaoh finally needed someone who could understand what no one else could understand, Joseph was ready. Not because life had been easy, because life had been easy, because life had prepared him. Chosen one, hear this carefully. The place that has felt like your lowest point does not have to become your permanent identity. The size of the calling often determines the depth of the preparation. The life you are meant to carry tomorrow sometimes requires a shaping process you never would have chosen today. This is the second layer of what you have been living through. Sometimes what feels like resistance is actually training. The very weight pushing against you is quietly building the strength your next season will ask of you. There are days when your faith feels stronger than ever, yet your circumstances seem unwilling to cooperate. Your heart grows clearer while your finances remain uncertain. You become more convinced of your purpose, yet the opportunities you expected stay frustratingly still. You keep asking for direction, and heaven seems to answer with more waiting. That contradiction can make anyone question what they once believed. But perhaps the question itself has been leading you in the wrong direction. Instead of asking, "Why is everything working against me?" perhaps ask, "What is this season quietly building within me?" From the inside, opposition and preparation often feel exactly the same. Both create pressure. Both require endurance. Both ask something of you. The difference is only revealed by where they lead. And chosen one, everything about your journey points upward, even when today's circumstances struggle to convince you otherwise. The setbacks that discouraged you may have been quiet changes in direction. The closed doors that frustrated you may have been protecting a timing your present understanding could not yet appreciate. Sometimes heaven redirects so gently that it feels like disappointment before it finally reveals itself as mercy. If you are still here listening, if something inside you would not let you walk away, because these words reached a place you rarely allow anyone else to see, I want you to leave a simple declaration in the comments. Type, "I am in the forge." Not because those words hold power by themselves, but because naming your season changes the way you carry it. The people who remain when the truth becomes deeply personal, the ones who stay even when the message becomes an honest mirror instead of comfortable encouragement. Those are often the people this message has been waiting for. If you'd like, I can continue rewriting the next section in the same tone and style, so the entire script remains seamless. Before we go any deeper, I want you to carry one question with you. Don't rush to answer it yet. Just let it rest quietly in your heart, because by the time we reach the end of this message, it may change the way you understand everything you have been walking through. What if the fog that has followed you through this season has never been proof that God stepped away? What if it has never been evidence that your faith somehow failed? What if the heaviness you have struggled to explain has a deeper purpose than you have been able to see? Hold that thought for a little while, because we are coming back to it. For now, I want to take you beneath the surface to a place that is rarely talked about. Most people focus on the visible symptoms of a difficult season, but very few pause long enough to ask what is happening underneath them. Until the deeper cause is recognized, people spend years managing pain instead of allowing real transformation to begin. Here is something I have seen again and again in the lives of many chosen ones. Just before a new season begins to unfold, something unexpected often happens inside them. It is rarely an attack that comes from the outside first. More often, it is a quiet weariness that has been gathering over years of waiting, years of hoping, years of standing on the edge of promises that always seemed just beyond reach. Little by little, disappointment begins leaving its mark. Not all at once, not dramatically, just one unanswered prayer after another, one closed door, one post-dawned hope, one more morning where you wondered how much longer you could keep believing. Eventually, it becomes harder to receive what your heart still longs for. Imagine an old radio sitting by a window through years of changing weather. The broadcast never stopped. The music never disappeared. Yet, over time, the receiver became less sensitive, until every station sounded distant and full of static. The problem was never that the signal was absent. The instrument simply carried the weight of too many storms. Perhaps that feels familiar. Maybe you have prayed more, searched harder, tried to become stronger, and still felt as though something inside you could no longer receive, with the openness it once had. You began wondering whether heaven had grown silent, when in reality, your heart had simply grown tired. Chosen one, hear this carefully. God has not stopped speaking. The promise has not become smaller. What was prepared for your life has not drifted away while you were waiting. The only thing that has changed is the part of you that has carried the weight of waiting for so long. And the fact that you recognize that difference is more hopeful than you realize. The very awareness that something feels blocked is evidence that your heart is still reaching. A heart that no longer cared would not notice the distance. The longing itself is a quiet reminder that hope is still alive beneath the exhaustion. So do not confuse weariness with the end of your story. Weariness can heal. What has grown tired can become strong again. I want to slow down here because one word matters more than all the others. Worn, not lost, not erased, not forgotten. Simply worn. There is a difference. Everything that God has been forming within you still exists. The compassion you were born with is still there. The calling that first stirred your heart is still there. The capacity to receive what is meant for you has never disappeared. It has simply carried more weight than it was ever meant to carry alone. Scripture speaks of God as the potter who shapes what he loves with patient hands. Clay feels pressure before it reveals its purpose. It bends before it becomes strong enough to carry what it was created to hold. The pressure was never meant to convince the clay that it had been rejected. It was always part of the shaping. Perhaps your waiting has been more like that than you realized. You were never being abandoned. You were being formed. The version of you that began this journey could not have carried everything waiting on the other side of it. The person who receives the promise is rarely the same person who first prayed for it. Time has changed your face, your heart, your patience, your wisdom. and even the way you love. Chosen one, look at yourself with gentler eyes. The person you are today is not evidence that you arrived too late. It is evidence that the shaping has been deeper than you understood. The season that felt like endless preparation may have been preparing someone capable of carrying what earlier versions of you could only dream about. Now we arrive at an important turning point. Understanding the pattern brings clarity, but clarity alone does not restore a weary heart. Knowing why you feel this way is only the beginning. There is still another step waiting beyond understanding, and that is where this message is leading. Before we go there, I want to speak to the quiet voice that may already be rising inside you. Perhaps you immediately began remembering every mistake you made. Maybe you started replaying the prayers you think you should have prayed differently. The moments when fear felt stronger than faith, or the days you believed you disappointed God. Listen carefully. That voice has become familiar because it has spoken for a long time. It is familiar. It is understandable. But it does not tell the whole truth. Your heart did not become weary because you failed beyond repair. It became weary because it has carried more than any human heart was designed to carry without rest. Years of disappointment, hidden grief, silent perseverance, and hopes that remain suspended all leave their mark. You did not arrive here because you were weak. You arrived here because you kept carrying what mattered to you. There is a difference. Maybe a part of you still hesitates to believe any of this because you have heard encouraging words before. You remember leaving inspired only to wake a few days later feeling exactly the same. That hesitation deserves compassion rather than judgment. It is what often grows in people who have hoped deeply more than once. Stay with me a little longer. Before any lasting change begins, the full shape of what has been happening inside you must first come into the light. Once you can finally see it clearly, you will no longer mistake your deepest wounds for your identity, and that changes everything. There is one more pattern I want to place gently in front of you. Chosen one, because I have seen it unfold in far too many lives to ignore it. It appears after the waiting has lasted longer than anyone expected. After hope has been tested enough times that simply getting through the day begins to feel like an accomplishment. It happens so quietly that most people never realize it has happened at all. Little by little, endurance begins to replace expectancy. Instead of waking up asking, "What might God place in my hands today?" you begin asking, "How do I survive one more day like yesterday?" Instead of looking with open hands toward what could still arrive, you start protecting what little strength you have left. Your heart slowly learns to live smaller, not because that is who you are, but because it has been trying to keep you safe. At first, that feels wise. It feels responsible. It even feels mature. But after enough time, survival begins to disguise itself as identity. You stop expecting joy because disappointment has become familiar. You stop dreaming out loud because silence feels easier than hoping again. You convince yourself that asking for less will somehow hurt less if the answer takes longer than you can bear. That is what prolonged waiting often does to the human heart. Not because it is weak, because it has been carrying more than it was ever created to carry without rest. Chosen one, there is something important I want you to hear. The way you learned to survive this season may have protected you then, but it cannot carry you into what comes next. There is a difference. A shelter that keeps you alive during the storm eventually becomes too small once the sky begins to clear. Sometimes the hardest part of healing is realizing that the walls which once protected you have become the very walls keeping you from receiving what has been waiting for you. Think back to the way you saw the world when you were very young, before disappointment taught you to brace yourself, before every unanswered prayer made you hesitate, before every loss convinced you to lower your expectations. There was a kind of openness in you. You believed with your whole heart. You trusted without constantly calculating how much it might cost if things did not work out. Life has a way of teaching us to tighten our grip. It teaches us to expect less, so that we hurt less. It teaches us to guard our hearts so carefully that, over time, they struggle to recognize hope even when it quietly returns. But that openness was never meant to disappear forever. It can awaken again. If something inside you has begun to recognize itself while listening to these words, I want you to do something simple. Type, "I receive what is mine," not as a way of convincing yourself, but as a quiet decision to stop living only in survival mode. There comes a moment when receiving becomes an act of courage, and perhaps that moment is beginning for you now. Let me speak for a moment to the person who almost stopped believing. Not the one who stopped praying, not the one who stopped showing up, the one who still does both, while secretly wondering whether their heart has enough strength left to hope again. Chosen one, this part is for you. The distance you feel between yourself and the promise is not always telling you the truth about the promise. Sometimes it is revealing how exhausted your heart has become from carrying expectation through a long season of silence. Imagine standing beside a radio that once filled the room with music. If years of weather slowly wore down the receiver, the silence would never mean the station stopped broadcasting. It would simply mean the instrument needed care before it could hear clearly again. Perhaps your heart has felt something like that. Perhaps what seemed like distance has really been exhaustion. Perhaps heaven has been speaking more gently than you realized, while your soul has simply been too tired to recognize the sound. There is one more thing I want you to notice before we move forward, because this catches many chosen ones by surprise. As you draw closer to the season you have been prepared for, the pressure often changes, not louder, more personal. Distractions suddenly become more convincing. Practical voices begin suggesting that you settle for something smaller. The temptation is no longer to quit everything overnight. It is to quietly lower your expectations until they fit your present circumstances. Be careful there, that moment matters. Sometimes the greatest temptation before a breakthrough is not giving up completely. It is accepting less than what your heart has been preparing to carry. The resistance feels stronger because you are closer than you realize. The uncertainty grows louder because your old way of seeing is making room for a new one. From where you stand, it can feel like everything is pushing against you. From another perspective, it may be the final stretch of becoming. Chosen one, you are still here. You have survived days you once believed would break you. You kept showing up when no one applauded your faith. You continued walking even when every step felt heavier than the last. That matters. The question is no longer whether you have endured enough. The question is whether your heart is willing to receive again. Look back for a moment at everything we have uncovered together. You now see that pressure does not always announce defeat. Sometimes it is the quiet evidence that something unseen has already begun moving into place. You understand that seasons of narrowing often prepare the space for unexpected expansion, and that what felt like delay has often been shaping a deeper version of you than comfort ever could. You have also begun to recognize something even more personal. Surviving and receiving are not the same posture. The way your heart protected itself through disappointment was never a flaw. It was an act of survival. It helped you endure what had to be endured. But the posture that preserved you yesterday cannot become the posture that defines your tomorrow. And that changes the way you see yourself. Chosen one, you have never been someone left behind by your calling. You have been someone quietly transformed by it. While the outside appeared still, something inside you continued growing roots that no one else could see. The depth that now lives within you was never wasted. It was formed patiently through every unanswered question, every lonely season, every moment you chose to keep walking when you could not yet see where the road was leading. That is what you understand now. That is why this season feels different. And that is who you have been becoming all along. If you'd like, I can continue the remaining sections in the exact same voice and pacing so the full script reads as one seamless, professionally humanized narrative. Chosen one, if you have stayed with this message until now, you are already carrying something you did not have when you first pressed play. The fog may not have disappeared yet, but you can finally see it for what it is. What once felt invisible has begun to take shape, and there is quiet freedom in that. because you cannot heal what you have never been able to recognize. The question is no longer whether something has been standing in your way. You know that now. The deeper question is how your heart begins receiving again without demanding more strength from a soul that has already carried more than enough. If you have spent years surviving, the answer cannot simply be to try harder, believe harder, or force yourself to become someone you no longer have the energy to be. Restoration rarely begins with more effort. It begins when the constant pressure to prove yourself finally loosens its grip. Think about the openness you carried as a child, before disappointment taught you to brace for loss, before silence made you question every prayer, before repeated waiting convinced you to protect yourself from hope. Your heart met life with trust instead of caution. You did not wake up measuring every possibility against every past wound. You simply received each day with open hands. Life changes us, not all at once, slowly, quietly, one disappointment after another, one unanswered question after another, until one day we realize we have become experts at surviving while forgetting what it feels like to receive. Yet the deepest part of you has never disappeared. It has simply been covered by the weight of everything you have carried. If there has been a quiet grief in your life lately, perhaps it is not because you have lost who you are. Perhaps it is because a deeper part of you has been waiting patiently beneath years of exhaustion, hoping the day would finally come when you stopped blaming yourself for becoming tired. Chosen one, hear this with gentleness. You do not have to earn your way back to the person God has been forming. You do not have to exhaust yourself trying to manufacture peace. You do not have to perform your way into wholeness. Sometimes the first sign of healing is simply believing that your heart was never beyond restoration. Maybe that is why these words found you today, not to give you another task, not to place another burden on your shoulders, but to loosen one. There is a quiet confidence that begins growing when you realize the waiting has shaped you more than it has damaged you. The years you once called wasted begin revealing hidden strength. The prayers you thought disappeared into silence begin looking more like seeds that have been growing beneath the surface all along. Chosen one, the promise has never depended on your ability to carry everything alone. It has always been preparing you while preparing the moment. That changes the way you see yourself. It changes the way you see the waiting. And it changes the way you walk into what comes next. What has been prepared for you has never stopped moving toward you. The invitation now is not to strive with greater intensity, but to become willing to receive with greater openness. Open hands often recognize what tightly closed fists cannot hold. So before we continue, let your heart become still for a moment. Release the need to solve everything today. Release the pressure to understand every unanswered question. Release the quiet accusation that tells you you should have been further along by now. You have carried enough. The deeper current beneath this entire message has never been about convincing you that something extraordinary will suddenly appear. It has been reminding you that God has been faithfully shaping the person who will recognize what has been moving toward them all along. And chosen one, there is still something your heart needs to hear before this message comes to its close. Chosen one, if something inside you has quietly awakened while listening to these words, don't ignore that feeling. Moments like this rarely arrive with noise. More often, they come as a gentle recognition, the kind that settles deep inside you before your mind can fully explain it. Sometimes the smallest shift within your heart becomes the beginning of an entirely different season. I also want to pause for a moment and acknowledge something important. The people who are still here are not simply listening out of curiosity. You stayed because something in this message reached a place that has been waiting a long time to be understood. If that is you, I want you to leave a simple declaration in the comments. Type, "I claim this now," not because those words create the change, but because there is something powerful about choosing, even quietly, to receive instead of merely surviving. Every meaningful season begins with an inward decision. long before anyone else can see its fruit. Now let me speak to the question that almost every chosen one carries after a long season of waiting. It is not the theological question or the philosophical question. It is the deeply human one. You hear these words, something inside you agrees with them, and yet tomorrow morning still waits for you with the same responsibilities, the same unanswered prayers, and the same unanswered prayers, and the same unfinished story. So what do you do then? What do you do when your heart has changed, but your circumstances have not fully caught up? What do you do with the distance between where you are and where you believe you are being led? The answer is quieter than most people expect. The space between today's understanding and tomorrow's fulfillment is not empty. It has purpose. Every day within that space is shaping the person who will eventually step into what has already been prepared. The question is never simply how long the season lasts. The deeper question is who you are becoming while you walk through it. Many people unknowingly treat this season like a waiting room. They count the days. They measure every delay. They wonder how much longer they have to endure before life finally begins again. But perhaps this has never been a waiting room. Perhaps it has always been a preparation room. Those are very different places. In a waiting room, your attention stays fixed on the clock. In a preparation room, your attention turns toward what is quietly growing inside you. One posture creates frustration. The other creates readiness. And readiness changes everything. Chosen one. There are people who arrive at the edge of answered prayer, still carrying the posture of survival. Their hands remain tightly closed because they spent so long protecting what little strength they had left. They receive only a fraction of what life is trying to place into their hands. Not because less was given, but because exhaustion convinced them they could only carry so much. That is why I want to invite you to ask a different question. Instead of asking, when will everything finally change? Try asking, what is this season placing within me today? One question creates anxiety because it depends on a timetable you cannot control. The other creates peace because it returns your attention to the work already unfolding inside you. That quiet participation matters. Every act of trust, every moment of honesty, every small decision to keep your heart open instead of closing it a little more is part of your preparation. There is another weight I want to speak to before we continue. It is the weight of prayers that still seem unfinished. Perhaps there are names you still whisper before God, dreams you still carry, doors you still hope will open. You have prayed sincerely, you have believed as faithfully as you knew how. And over time, those unanswered places have become so familiar that they settled beneath everything else. Like a quiet ache you stopped trying to explain. Many people conclude one of two things. Either God has chosen something entirely different, or they somehow failed along the way. But perhaps there is another way to see this season. Perhaps there is a difference between something that has been forgotten and something that is still being prepared. Think about a field after seeds have been planted. For a long time, nothing appears to change above the surface. Yet beneath the soil, life is already unfolding in ways no eye can measure. The silence is not empty. It is simply hidden. Maybe your life has felt something like that. Chosen one, you are not being overlooked. You are being prepared, and while the promise is being prepared for you, your heart is also being prepared for the promise. Those two journeys have always belonged together. So participate in your own restoration with gentleness, not as another project to complete, not as another burden to carry, but as an act of faith. Allow yourself to heal. Allow yourself to hope again. Allow yourself to become someone who believes that receiving is just as holy as enduring. If you can feel something beginning to loosen inside you as you listen, if the grip of endless waiting is finally beginning to soften, I want you to write one more declaration in the comments. Type, I exit the waiting room, because that is what is changing. You are no longer measuring your life only by what has not happened yet. You are preparing yourself for what is already making its way toward you. Now close your eyes for just a moment and imagine a morning 6 months from today. You wake before the alarm, and before your thoughts begin racing, you notice something different. The heaviness that used to greet you every morning is gone. In its place is a quiet confidence that asks for no proof because it is already settled deep within you. The room around you has not changed very much. The furniture is familiar. The window is the same. The morning light falls across the floor exactly as it always has. But you are different. The version of you who opens your eyes that morning no longer carries every day as though it were another battle to survive. There is more space inside your heart, more peace in your breathing, more clarity in the way you see your life. When you reach for your relationships, your calling, your creativity, and the work placed before you, they no longer feel impossibly distant. They feel within reach because something inside you has changed first. That future version of you is not an illusion. It is the quiet result of a heart that has learned to receive again. And the distance between the person you are today and the person you are becoming is simply the sacred space where restoration continues its patient work. If you'd like, I can continue the final section in the same voice so the entire rewritten script remains seamless from beginning to end. Before this message comes to a close, I want to invite you into one quiet moment. If you are able, place your hand over your heart, not as a ritual and not because the gesture itself changes anything, but because sometimes your heart understands what your mind has been trying to explain for far too long. Give yourself permission to become fully present, just for these next few moments. If you can, close your eyes. Notice your breathing without trying to change it. Notice the tension you have been carrying in your shoulders, the tightness in your jaw, or the quiet weight that has settled in your chest for so long that it almost feels familiar. You do not have to force any of it to disappear. Simply becoming aware of what you've been holding is often the first moment your heart realizes it no longer has to carry it alone. Light never struggles to overcome darkness. It simply enters, and everything begins to change because of its presence. In the same way, something inside you may already be beginning to soften. The part of you that has remained guarded through disappointment, the part that learned to brace itself before every new hope, can finally begin to rest. Chosen one, I want to tell you something I hope you never forget. I am deeply grateful that you stayed, not only through this message, but through the years that came before it. Through the nights when faith was quieter than fear, through the mornings when you kept showing up even though nothing around you seemed to confirm that your prayers were making any difference. Through the ordinary days when no one saw the battle taking place inside you. That kind of perseverance rarely receives applause. Most people never notice it, but heaven does. The strength that continues believing without needing constant recognition is one of the rarest forms of courage a person can carry. So today, I want to release something from your heart. Release the belief that every delay meant you were disqualified. Release the conclusion that silence meant you had been forgotten. Release the quiet accusation that told you your unanswered prayers were proof that you were somehow not enough. Those conclusions made sense while you were hurting. They simply were never the whole truth. Every difficult season has shaped something within you that comfort never could have formed. Every long stretch of waiting has carved out room for wisdom, compassion, patience, and a steadiness that could not have been developed any other way. Chosen one, you have never been abandoned. You have been prepared. The years did not diminish who you are. They revealed who you were becoming. The version of you standing here today carries a depth that earlier versions of you could never have imagined. What once felt like endless delay has quietly become part of your preparation to carry what is ahead with humility, strength, and peace. Because you remained faithful through the long road, you are not arriving empty. You are arriving ready. If these words have spoken to something your soul has carried in silence, I invite you to leave one final declaration in the comments. Type, "I am the chosen one," not as a statement of superiority over anyone else, but as a quiet acknowledgement that you are willing to embrace the person God has been patiently shaping you to become. And when this message becomes a memory, there may come a day when the familiar pressure quietly returns. You may wake up and wonder whether anything really changed. Old thoughts may whisper that you were foolish to hope again, or that nothing has moved at all. When that moment comes, do not measure the truth by the intensity of your emotions. Return to what you now understand. Remember that pressure is not always punishment. Remember that preparation often feels uncomfortable before it becomes visible. Remember that God has never measured your life by the pace you wished it had moved, but by the work being completed within you while you waited. Keep choosing the small things, the quiet prayers, the honest conversations, the moments of gratitude, the decision to remain open instead of becoming hardened. Those ordinary choices shape extraordinary seasons. Chosen one, you were never created to carry life with a heart permanently weighed down by survival. The burden you have been holding served a purpose for a season, but it was never meant to become your identity. You are allowed to loosen your grip now. You are allowed to step into what is ahead with open hands instead of guarded ones. So let me speak these words over you before we part. May clarity return where confusion has lingered the longest. May peace settle into the places that have carried hidden fear. May hope quietly rise again where disappointment convinced you to expect less. May your heart remember what it feels like to receive instead of merely endure. And may you recognize, perhaps sooner than you expect, that what once looked like delay was quietly becoming direction. Chosen one, the movement has already begun. From where you stand, it may still feel like pressure, uncertainty, and a future that refuses to reveal itself all at once. But from a higher view, it looks like arrival. If you'd like, I can also help unify all of these rewritten sections into a single seamless script with consistent pacing, vocabulary, and emotional cadence from beginning to end.